interests are being protected here? The consumers or ultimately the corporations? And at the moment, it's the corporations who have the right to pollute, the silent rights to emit, to cause damage. And we need to shift that completely so that, in fact, it's protection of the wider society, not just humans, but the wider community as a whole. We need that very definite shift to happen now.
Well, I'm delighted that you're working on it. I will tell you something that frightened me last week that happened. Something passed in Congress here that requires all of us to replace our light bulbs with a mercury-laden light bulb that we are now going to be forced to use. Now, I have to tell you, I am so into health and wellness, and I have a dedication and commitment to that. That means I'm into what's in our water, what do we drink, what's in our air, what do we use on our body, exactly like what you said. But we are being forced to use a certain type of light bulb now. Now, when you put this together and find out that GE is part of the cap and trade system, and that GE worked with one of the people in Enron, and that the head of JP Morgan Chase, who created the derivatives market, by the way, a woman, was part of the architect of the cap and trade system. I must have done, 15 pieces on everything you ever want to know about finance, from credit default swaps to derivatives to high-frequency trading. I mean, when I go in, I go in. But this is the part to me that you can have the greatest commitment to the stewardship of the planet. And yet, if you look at the people, where they've come from, and what their influences have been, what their consciousness is, you have to look at the detail of who's involved. Why is GE involved in the cap and trade system? Why? Why are we being told we cannot use anything other than these next mercury-laden light bulbs? See, that's not okay. And it's not just about carbon. It's about way more than carbon. That's an issue that is going to affect the health of billions of people across the world. We have forced fluoridation of our water here in California. And the reality is, when I was a young girl, fluoride was promoted by the Dental Society being very, very good for your teeth. Well, 30 years or 40 years have gone by, and we find out totally new information on the role of fluoride as a neurotoxin. But the agencies here will not allow that information to be made public knowledge unless you go digging for it. You don't know it. So kids are getting it. Our baby food has been infiltrated. We have genetically modified foods. I don't even get to know when I shop, Polly, am I eating a genetically modified fruit? They're not telling me. And they're totally different. Totally different. So there is a whole systems paradigm, which you're talking about, that needs to encompass everything. Everything. And I hope that you are able to somehow create the instruments where corporations cannot get away from the accountability. And it doesn't matter how much money they have. They can't pay off the judges. They can't pay off the court system. They cannot pay off high officials because it won't matter. Somehow, this instrument and this paradigm impacts and integrates into everything. It's scary to be alive now. I'm going to be told what kind of light bulb I have to use. And they're only looking at one piece, which is this connection with the carbon. But they're not looking at the fact that it has mercury in it. I did a whole show, by the way, about light, everything you want to know about light. It was the most fascinating piece. I will send you links to it. To all these things I'm telling you about. But the reality is the light that is being emitted can impact our creativity, can expand our energy, or it can totally deplete you. So it's very important that if something is going to be regulated, they better be regulating something that's going to enhance people's well-being and not the other. And that's my issue with regulations. It's not whole systems. It's a piece. No. It's just a little small piece of something, like when you look at the spokes on a wheel, it's a spoke. It's not the core. The core would be taking into consideration everything: agriculture, air, the ability to choose your own form of medicine, your own form of life extension, etc. There are people that are dying of cancer that can never get different types of remedies other than chemo and radiation. And they have to fly all over the world to save their lives. So to me, there's a whole systems legal structure that needs to be tended to. Obviously, you're working on it. How is it going so far?
Well, it's good. And I think you've hit on a really important point here. Buckminster Fuller used a term back in the 50s, which was we need a trim tab.
Exactly.
And a trim tab, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's actually the button that's used very often on cruise liners, that if you are to press this button, it connects down to a wire which takes it out to the udder at the back. And what it does is it turns something just very tiny, but by doing that, then it turns all the other cogs, which then the whole boat, as a result, can turn. But the energy that's expended to press that button, that initial button, the trim tab button, is nominal. It's just pushing your finger. But you can turn the whole
ship
liner around. That is a trim tab, and we're needing that just now. We're needing the trim tabs that can turn around the whole situation here. And this is where an international crime of ecocide really comes into its own. It is a trim tab on so many levels. By creating, first of all, an international crime of ecocide, it's first of all, it's international because, of course, an awful lot of damage and destruction that's done to the planet can start in one place. Pollution can be airborne or waterborne and end up in another. Hence, we have Inuit mothers breastfeeding babies and discovering that they have DDT in their breast milk, even though DDT is now banned. And the DDT that's been used in America or Britain, 20, 30 years ago. So it's addressing the internationality of it, but also the criminality aspect, but also this idea of it being damage, destruction to, or loss of ecosystems. So it's a very holistic approach. It's looking at the whole. It's seeing humans as part of an ecosystem. So as part of an ecosystem within a given community, and that community not just being humans, but the land, the soils, the waters, the trees, the whole environment. And by putting something like that in place, then as an overarching umbrella piece of legislation that supersedes everything else, then what you have is all other laws will have to come into line with it. And it means that certain laws will have to either go or be amended to come into line with that. Very important that we have something that's a trim tab that can turn everything that's still creating huge, huge problems elsewhere.
That's a brilliant analogy of the trim tab. And yet here's the thing. Somebody told me about 2 years ago, if you do not form a treaty, this thing has to be formed at the level of an international treaty. Maybe it's an earth treaty. I don't know. But basically what I've been told is that on a treaty level, countries can just agree and do whatever they're going to do. They just do their business via treaty. And they can bypass all this other regulation, all these other laws. It's like this upper echelon or gestalt of activity. How do you see dealing with treaties that often bypass things that are agreed upon? Because they can do something by treaty.
We already have the treaty in existence that needs amending to add an ecocide. So that's called the Rome Treaty. And the Rome Treaty was written in 1998. And what that did was it put in place the International Criminal Court, and that's the court that governs the 4 crimes against peace. And those 4 crimes are genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. I'm saying all we need to do is we don't need to write a whole new treaty. We just amend the existing one, and we add a 5th crime against peace, that being ecocide. What is so important, however, yes, you've got a point there in saying that you can just write a treaty and nobody does anything about it. If you do not have an international court in which you can take action, then it is pointless. And that's the biggest problem with the Kyoto Protocol, that at the moment, where do you take action for all those countries that have failed to uphold their so-called binding limits? And in fact, all countries failed, bar one, which was Portugal last year. So, prima facie, you could say they should all be taken to court, but what court? There is no court really that's dealing with this. It certainly hasn't been written in as part of it. And it's not a crime, necessarily. So what we have here is we have 4 existing crimes that for the first time ever now have an international court. What happened was back in 1948 was the first international criminal court. That was the Nuremberg war trials. But of course that was specific to an incident, after the incident had happened. Once they had concluded business there, then it closed shop. It took us until 1998 to then put together and have ratified